There is a single sentence, written over 2 centuries ago, that continues to shape the lives of every American citizen today. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. 27 words. That is all it took for the Founding Fathers to enshrine one of the most powerful and debated rights in human history. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution is not just a legal provision. It is a philosophical declaration that free people have the inherent right to defend themselves, their families, and their nation. To understand why this amendment exists, we have to travel back to the late 1700s. The American colonists had just fought a brutal war against a tyrannical government that attempted to disarm them. One of the first acts of British aggression before the Revolutionary War was the attempt to seize colonial weapons and ammunition at Lexington and Concord in 1775. The Founding Fathers understood something deeply important. A government that fears its citizens will always try to disarm them first. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and their contemporaries were not writing for hunters or sport shooters. They were writing for a people who had just experienced firsthand what happens when citizens cannot defend themselves against an overreaching power. The Second Amendment was born from lived experience, from blood and sacrifice, and from an unshakable belief that liberty requires the ability to protect it. This is the foundation upon which millions of Americans stand today when they exercise their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Over the decades, the Second Amendment has been interpreted, debated, challenged in courts, and dissected by legal scholars from every corner of the political spectrum. But in 2008, the United States Supreme Court delivered a landmark ruling in the case of District of Columbia versus Heller that settled a critical question once and for all. The Supreme Court ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm, independent of service in a militia, and to use that firearm for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. This was not a radical new interpretation. It was a confirmation of what the plain language of the amendment had always said. The phrase, "the right of the people," appears in multiple places throughout the Bill of Rights, and in every other instance, it refers to an individual right, not a collective one. 2 years later, in the case of McDonald versus City of Chicago, the Supreme Court extended this ruling to apply to state and local governments as well, making it clear that no government entity in the United States has the authority to strip law-abiding citizens of this fundamental right. Understanding these rulings matters because they remind us that the Second Amendment is not a privilege granted by the government. It is a right that exists prior to government, one that the Constitution simply recognizes and protects. When we talk about the importance of the Second Amendment, we are talking about a right that has been affirmed at the highest levels of American jurisprudence, rooted in natural law, and defended by generations of patriots who understood that freedom without the means to protect it is just an illusion. One of the most powerful arguments for the Second Amendment is not found in courtrooms or history books. It is found in real-life moments where ordinary Americans used their legally owned firearms to stop extraordinary evil. These are not hypothetical scenarios. These are documented events that saved lives, and the footage exists to prove it. On July 17, 2022, in Greenwood Park Mall in Greenwood, Indiana, a gunman opened fire in the food court, killing 3 people before a 22-year-old man named Elisha Dicken drew his legally carried firearm and engaged the shooter from approximately 40 feet away. Within 15 seconds, Dicken fired 10 rounds, stopping the attack before law enforcement even arrived on the scene. Police later praised his actions, stating that his response was nothing short of heroic. Surveillance footage from the mall captured the entire event, showing how quickly a single armed citizen can change the outcome of a mass casualty situation. Then there is the 2017 Sutherland Springs church shooting in Texas, where a gunman killed 26 people inside the First Baptist Church. As the shooter exited the building, local resident Stephen Williford, a former National Rifle Association instructor, grabbed his rifle and engaged the gunman outside. Williford struck the shooter twice, causing him to flee in his vehicle. Williford then flagged down a passing driver, Johnny Langendorf, and the two pursued the gunman at high speed until the shooter ultimately crashed and died from his wounds. Without Stephen Williford's intervention, the death toll could have been significantly higher. In 2019, during a West Freeway Church of Christ shooting in White Settlement, Texas, a gunman opened fire during a Sunday service. Within 6 seconds, a trained church security volunteer named Jack Wilson drew his firearm and neutralized the threat with a single shot. The entire incident was captured on the church's live stream video, and it spread across the internet as one of the clearest examples ever recorded of an armed citizen stopping a mass shooting in real time. These are not isolated incidents. According to research published by the Crime Prevention Research Center, there have been hundreds of documented cases where armed citizens have stopped or significantly limited the damage caused by active shooters. The mainstream media rarely covers these stories with the same intensity as the tragedies themselves, but the evidence is undeniable. At its most personal and immediate level, the Second Amendment is about one thing above all else: the ability of a parent, a spouse, a sibling, or a neighbor to protect the people they love when danger arrives at their door. Law enforcement officers are heroic public servants, but they cannot be everywhere at once. The average response time for police in the United States is between 10 and 18 minutes, depending on the location. In a home invasion, an assault, or any violent confrontation, those minutes are an eternity. A firearm in the hands of a trained, responsible citizen is the only tool that can immediately equalize a dangerous situation. Consider the reality faced by millions of Americans who live in rural areas, far from the nearest police station. Consider the single mother at home, alone with her children, when an intruder breaks down the door at 2 a.m. Consider the elderly man who cannot physically overpower a younger, stronger attacker. For these Americans, a firearm is not a symbol of aggression. It is a lifeline. It is the difference between being a victim and being a survivor. The data supports this reality. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, an organization not known for being pro-gun, conducted a study that estimated defensive gun uses in the United States occur between 60,000 and 2.5 million times per year. Even at the most conservative estimate, that represents tens of thousands of Americans who used a firearm to protect themselves or their families without firing a single shot in many cases, simply by presenting the weapon and deterring the threat. Responsible gun ownership means training. It means safe storage. It means understanding the weight of the tool you carry. It means teaching your children about firearm safety so that the weapon in your home is a protector, not a hazard. Millions of American gun owners live this reality every single day, and they do so with the full backing of the Constitution and the Supreme Court of the United States. The Second Amendment is under constant pressure. Legislative efforts at both the state and federal level continue to push for restrictions that many legal experts argue cross the constitutional line. Background check expansions, magazine capacity limits, red flag laws, and outright bans on certain categories of firearms are all part of an ongoing national conversation. And while reasonable people can debate the specifics of gun policy, one principle must remain non-negotiable: the fundamental right of law-abiding Americans to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. History has shown us repeatedly what happens to populations that are disarmed by their governments. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a documented pattern that spans continents and centuries. An armed citizenry is not a threat to a free society. It is the backbone of one. The Founding Fathers understood this. The Supreme Court has affirmed this. And millions of Americans live this truth every single day. The Second Amendment is not about politics. It is not about party affiliation. It is about the most basic human instinct that exists: the desire to protect yourself and the people you love. It is about ensuring that when the worst moment of your life arrives, you are not left defenseless. It is about freedom in its most raw and honest form. The right to bear arms is the right to say that your life has value, that your family's safety matters, and that no government, no criminal, and no threat will take that from you without a fight. That is why the Second Amendment was written. That is why it has endured. And that is why every American who values liberty must understand it, defend it, and never take it for granted. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe for more.